Techtopia er en ugenlig podcast om mennesker og deres teknologi, udgivet af Ingeniørforeningen Ida i samarbejde med .dk og Ida Forsikring. Mit navn er Henrik Føns, og det er mig, der bestemmer i
Techtopia.
Lige uden for mit vindue er der et cykelstativ med plads til en håndfuld cykler. Kommunen har formodentlig forestillet sig, at beboere og gæster skal parkere her, men stativet har også fået andre gæster, andre cykler. Udlejningscyklerne, som for eksempel de orange cykler fra det danske firma Donkey Republic, opdager så bærer de et skilt med teksten rugbrødsmotor, fordi det er dine ben og ikke en forbrændingsmotor, der driver værket. Og det lyder meget analogt og ikke særlig digitalt, men smartphone spiller faktisk en meget væsentlig rolle, når du skal leje en cykel. Den forener nemlig GPS, Bluetooth og digitale betalingsapps, og på den måde så skaber den et system, hvor du døgnet rundt i hele byen kan leje en cykel, der kan få dig effektivt fra A til B, uden at bidrage til trafikpropper eller til at forurene. Donkey Republic ville fra starten sikre en bæredygtig forretningsmodel, der er sund både for mennesker og miljø. Og manden bag Donkey Republic, han hedder Erdem Ovacik. Han kommer fra Istanbul, og han har så været en omvej omkring Stanford University i Californien i Silicon Valley, før han havnede i København og blev forelsket i det danske velfærdssamfund. Og selvom forelskelse kan gøre en blind, så opdagede han nu også, at det danske velfærdssystem godt kunne trænge til nogle opgraderinger, nogle forbedringer. Og inspirationen fandt han i sit virke som iværksætter. Han har nu skrevet bogen The Next Democracy, det næste demokrati, der henvender sig til dem, som tror på, at teknologi og sociale medier faktisk kan styrke vores politiske samtale, frem for at ødelægge den. Erdem Ovaciks tese, den er klar. Hvis digitaliseringen skaber problemer for demokratiet, ja, så må vi bruge teknologien og data til at skabe løsninger. Det centrale element i bogen er konceptet om meritdemokrati. Det handler om at opbygge et mere dynamisk, datadrevet og gennemskueligt styringssystem for samfundet, hvor vi borgere ikke bare stemmer hver 4 år, men løbende får reel og direkte indflydelse på både politiske forslag og offentlige ydelser. Det er en opfordring til at lade data tjene borgerne og demokratiet, frem for blot tech-giganternes bundlinje. Hele Erdem Ovaciks model er bygget op omkring cyklen som metafor på samfundet. Styret, hjulene, stellet og sadlen har alle sammen deres funktion i den samfundsmodel, som forfatteren forestiller sig. Jeg inviterede Erdem Ovacik i studiet til en samtale, der blev meget lang og dyb, som en god cykeltur, så du kan jo også vælge at hoppe op på din cykel med Techtopia i ørerne, og så lytte til cykelmandens tanker om det fremtidige demokrati.
So maybe I should first say that before Donkey Republic, I was working with social impact bonds for 2 years, which is a way to innovate how we deliver social services. It's a public-private contract with outcomes-based contract where the private companies get paid if they create the public goods that are defined with certain metrics. You can already hear that this is quite aligned with the book. And before that, I was doing a citizen participation platform called Decide, which was actually doing a game based on prediction markets. People were betting on the future policies. So Donkey was a sort of a break from these two attempts to innovate on the public space to do something much more hands-on and a service that actually creates a public good. But my realization from all this is that absent the institutions that understand and measure and reward the public impact, we will not be able to get there. We will fall short of creating impacts if we rely on consumer behavior, investor behavior, investing in ESG and whatsoever, and in people's private choices of I want to work in a company that does do good. Robert Reich, my professor at Berkeley, one of them, but fantastic person who used to be Secretary of Labor in the US and wrote many books. He's quite vocal, also currently leading conversation against, or not leading, but prominent voice against what's happening there. He used to say we have 4 economic hats as individuals. And we seem to have forgotten the fourth one. So the three is the consumer, the investor, and the laborer. The fourth one is the citizen. The citizen hat is actually a very strong economic hat. But there's, of course, a distance between us electing someone and them creating a policy that then creates the effects economically. But the essence of what I'm saying is the citizen hat represents what kind of policies we create and the economic impacts of that. And we cannot create the public goods we want absent the citizen hat or absent the collective action. We cannot do it through companies that want to do good. Why not? Well, actually, Daniel Schmachtenberger talks very well about this. If a company is doing all the responsible things and others like Donkey and then others come in and do the not so responsible things like, let's say, Lime. I don't want to single out any company, but then they will tap into things that are favored by consumers but are not good collectively. But it's not the company's task at the end to do the collective action. I mean, I was also criticized by our investors. I mean, you might want to do impact, but they need to do, and companies need to do profit. So it's not any company's fault that they have to focus on the profit. It's not any company's fault that they want to tap into consumers' addictions. If you want to eat sugar and you love sugar and you want to eat more sugar, are we going to blame the candy company? We shouldn't. We need to figure out other ways to, secure those people to dine better. We should make sugar more expensive. I mean, we had this conversation many times in public discourse with alcohol and tobacco and many other things. Now, hopefully with social media, but expecting that the company understands the impacts of their products and then, reduces those impacts is naive, because they are in it for the business. And if they didn't do it, if you put yourself actually in the CEO seat, they are in a competitive situation. There are other tobacco companies who will take over that market if they started to say you shouldn't smoke, or this tobacco is going to kill you and we're going to reduce the nicotine levels and this and whatnot. So,
but that's where politics comes into the picture. I mean,
absolutely.
That's you need to make regulation as a society.
That's where they should come into picture. But the story of the last 50 years is that somewhere in 1980s we stopped regulating effectively. I mean, this is the neoliberal times kicking in, and free market ideology gaining traction both on Democratic and Republican side in the US, and of course trickling down to UK and European politics. And in essence, the technologies that consumer companies have used and leveraged, both with tech companies with data and iteration, but also with the capital markets that enabled companies to much faster invest and divest and take risk. They have exploded. I mean, they've gained speed at levels that the public institutions could not keep up with, and currently cannot keep up with. We then had, of course, many brand new services and industries that we still struggle to regulate. I mean, compared to how we regulated, alcohol and tobacco and if you like, gasoline, we are far from that kind of understanding or effective public management when it comes to social media still, which has been around now since 2005. So I think we have retreated a lot in the public's role in creating the frames and the market conditions, and it's very difficult to create the kind of change that we seek and want absent that institution. So we desperately need that, but this institution cannot give it to us in its current state and shape and form. That's my argument in the book. I mean, this institution is an old steam engine that's trying to keep up with an electric Tesla. You need to upgrade, not only putting more coal in it, which is sort of asking that more people vote in the 4-year election and therefore we have success. No, I mean, we need to upgrade big time this old-fashioned institution.
But how should you upgrade it? I mean, are you going to use the technology of the companies, for instance, like you use the smartphone to sort of like upgrade the experience of having a bike?
So I talk in the book about the first half is sort of the critique of what's not working, and then how did we get here, and the second half is what I propose. And in what I propose, I call it merit democracy, and it's represented in a bicycle. And there are many components to this, and I don't think that we need the full thing at once. And that's quite important. Like, this is a modular thing. We can test each module separately. But the big picture is we need to learn from what has succeeded for consumer markets, for tech companies, and incorporate the elements in ways that can give us the strong public institutions. So I think there are three. Maybe there are more, but these three are important lessons we should have learned. One is the data-driven iterative learning cycle. Actually, this is something we know from Renaissance. And the Renaissance was all about science, and experimentation enabled us to learn things about, the human nature and the nature of the nature. So we were able to design things in a better way. And we didn't have to get stuck in arguments and dogma. We were able to show results of experimentation. This is what we need now when we think about democratic institution building. We need to think about what is the goal that we have, what kind of institution, what would represent a better institution. We need better quality of policies, we need agility, we need more public trust, we need more feeling of influence or agency.
But what you're talking about here is sort of like a feedback loop. I mean, how would that? I understand how it functions with a company. I mean, you make a product, you test it in the market, you find out, does it work, does it not work, what works, what does not work, and then you sort of like take it in-house again, make a new iteration and test it in the market again. How can you do that with policies? Or legislation, for instance.
Right. So I said before that there are three things we should learn. I'll keep in mind that and get back there after. But if we were able to define what we're trying to achieve with a policy, whether it's climate or housing or mental health, let's say that we want fewer teenage depressions and suicides and with a legislation that does ban the phones from schools at up to 16. Then you could also say there are other metrics we also care about and we should be testing up against, and essentially all the public goods. But especially, the learning outcomes and maybe leadership skills and community and whatnot. Because we expect that the regulations we put here are going to have these other effects. Then we can observe, maybe before we roll out the regulation everywhere, we can implement it in a few locations and observe what the effects are, and then roll out from there. But also we can iterate on it after 3 to 6 months and start to fine-tune it, if you like. And it's not good enough that it has worked in another city or nation. We need to adopt it to our reality. But of course, there's also learning across different locations. The bit that's missing is we're not measuring or disclosing what are the metrics we want, and then starting to do a measurement up against that. If you don't even disclose what are the metrics, what are you going to measure up against? So we lack the whole iterative loop that the companies have, because we don't define the North Stars, the metrics that are really valuable. And we don't have the measurement set up on the back of that.
If you're an elected politician, you have been elected because people want you to do certain stuff, some things that you have promised to fulfill. So that would be the metrics that you sort of like, how would you say that in English?
Fulfill?
Yeah.
Or work towards, yeah. But they are still vague.
That's true.
They are vague, and they are, you can cherry pick and manipulate that you have delivered them. I mean, cost of living. Okay, you could say very specifically, I'm going to reduce inflation, and that's a metric that we can probably agree on. But if you say you'll have a better life or you'll feel better economically, that's much more vague. what that means.
Pretty vague.
And for whom, yeah.
But then you sort of like move into the territory of religion, maybe, or I mean, it could quickly become something else.
Yeah, we talk then about emotions and connection, feeling safe. So I think today politics is much about feeling good or feeling safe with a leader, and about identifying yourself with that leader, and not so much about being able to really judge whether they have delivered something. I mean, we don't have much clarity, and no one can do that exercise. Did that policy really deliver? That's a very complex data exercise, because there are many effects that alongside that legislation will affect the thing that we cared about. So you need to isolate the other effects and really figure out the effect of this legislation. So it's not a trivial exercise, but it can be done, especially today where we have so much data and processing capacity.
Maybe we should go back to your 3 points.
Yeah, the 3 things to learn. So the first thing that we should learn from tech companies, that iterative data loops is something we can use or must use both in legislation and also execution of public goods. Execution of public goods, that means how we deliver them, whether basically how we incentivize the markets or how we pay for public goods. The second one is decentralized decision making. And that's that today we create this artificial centralized decision making in a democracy. On average, in European Union, one representative represents 500,000 citizens. In Danish parliament, it's about 60,000 citizens is represented by one representative. And that's quite a concentration of power and decision making. And they're, of course, supplied with the party staff and a lot of interest organizations. But if you compare it with how we make capital decisions, and for example, a startup that wants to raise money, you're not limited to, let's say, 3 institutions where you have to go, and if they reject you, you're done. The success of Spotify, if you like, is to decentralize the decision of what is good music. You don't have the 4 labels that are deciding, but any person that likes that music, you can start to have this traction. So we need to, that's the democratization, if you like, when we start to open up the decision process. So we need to embed that in our design of future democracy, where you don't have to rely on the vote is very little representation, really. I want to have my voice in not only voting in every one of the legislations, I want to be able to propose some. And now we are also have in Denmark, this 50,000 signatures can trigger a parliamentary hearing, but that's a very large threshold. The 50,000 signatures have to be signed with Meet ID, so really collecting that is quite a difficult task. And at the end, there's no reward. So the market principles is something where if you did a great job in the marketplace, then there's a reward for it. So we need to have the incentives that play in that decentralized decision-making system. So it's not good enough that everyone has a voice, but that the voice that actually contributes also get recognition financially. That's the learning from decentralized market designs. And the third one is, it's more recent, but it's the success of trust through transparency with blockchain. And the main lesson is that we trust Bitcoin because we understand the decision makers are the harvesters. It's democratized. There's no fraudulent behavior in that. I mean, the code decides. You cannot go around the code. And of course the innovation here, or the interesting part that what we learned is that through encryption and several copies decentralized, you cannot have a central power cheating with the data. So you cannot have this black box and now the new results is this. You cannot meddle with the reality of what transactions are happening. So I think those 3 are the inspirations to design this new thing. And then my pitch is merit democracy.
And what is merit democracy then?
Mm. So it is represented in this bicycle. I was quite impressed with.
Yeah, because we have this. It's actually a drawing you made for me.
Very quickly,
where we met at a conference a couple of months ago, and you said that you had written this book,
right?
And then you made a drawing of a bike. What does the bike mean in this case?
Yeah, the bike means a lot to me, obviously, but in this case, Kate Raworth had the donut, and so I put the bike with the sort of intention of making the conversation more tangible.
And there's this thing called the donut theory, which is an economic theory.
Yeah, you could say so. It's saying that the resources of the earth are limited. That's the outer boundary of the donut. And the inner boundary of donut is that we need the minimum conditions for decent human living. That's the achieving the social goals. So Kate Raworth, the inventor of that concept, says that our goal is to stay within the donut. And I like it a lot. My book...
But you like the bike better?
No, I mean, my book, I think, is building on that, how to get to donut. Because it doesn't talk about institutional reforms or how we are actually creating this kind of economy and political system that achieves the donut. So I think the bike goes to the donut.
Okay, so you have to bike to get to the donut.
I think so.
But I mean, I remember you talked about the different parts of the bike,
right,
representing different processes or states in this travel.
Yeah. So the handlebar is one thing, the front wheel is another thing, and the back wheel is the third thing. And if you like, the frame is the fourth thing. The handlebar is where we define what matters to us collectively in certain metrics. So we set goals. We price the goals. We set direction. It's actually very disturbing to me that we make policies absent a picture of what are our priorities and what are our priority challenges. Because when you make a policy, it touches to multiple, and then you can say, where are we spending our time? There was this topic about Danish flag, where it should be allowed to be installed in certain ways, and what challenge exactly is this one responding? In a company setting, I'm very used to the frameworks where you have a set of metrics that's kind of the issue tree, or if you like, the opportunity tree. So you take your North Star and you break it down into these different metrics. And for us, it would be the bike trip, and how many bikes do we have, and how many bikes are broken and available, and how do we improve the availability rate, and then goes to operational metrics of it goes into things like how often and how much should you pump the tire, and actually okay, so let me just say, I think we can express the most important public goods of a country, of a city, within 100 to 1,000 metrics. And the first thing I would do is to go to ministries and say, hey, you have all this budget. What are you trying to achieve with this? Both on supporting legislation, but also how you spend your money. What are you trying to create? Try to give me things that we can measure. We can give Denmark Statistic the task to say, this is what we have today on those metrics. They need to be measurable. I think this goal setting should be something we do online as citizens. We should be able to log into our BOGA, our citizen accounts. And in there, we should have our citizen wallets, which is the average tax paid by a Dane per year. And we should be able to allocate X% of that to different metrics. And we can introduce new metrics as well. You're not deciding what it should be used for exactly. You're saying, what metrics should it try to improve? You're actually pricing the metric. Let me put it this way. There are some goods that are private. There are some goods that are collective, public goods. We don't have a good pricing mechanism for public goods yet. This is a way to achieve the price of the public goods. We need an aggregate demand of the public goods from the population that wants it. If you want If you want clean streets, you also want a defense system, you also want public health and clean water, lack of, no congestion, traffic congestion, and, different things that we consider public goods. Maybe a healthy media environment. We should decide what the metrics are. Maybe you have a new metric proposal for that. So these metrics making up our healthy society, we need to decide what are the prices of these metrics comparatively. And then we can start to give that direction to the front wheel and the back wheel. But the first exercise is defining the metrics and pricing them through individuals doing it all for themselves. So the front wheel is the legislative cycle. And basically these metrics create markets. They create a demand. They create a demand for collective goods, for the public goods. Once you have the market for a demand, then you can say, okay, the legislations that we produce in the front wheel are going to be awarded based on how much they are able to create these metrics or improve these metrics. Because if we don't have any price on clean water or clean air for that matter, or lack of CO2 reduction, then there is no price for it. Then why should you even legislate about it? And over time, we create new metrics. Climate change was not an issue 30 years ago, now it is. Mental health with social media was not an issue, now it is. But how big of an issue is it compared to other things and so on? So we need to create those metrics. In the front wheel, once we have these metrics, we can say to people, here you have some citizen credits. They all start with equal. You can use these credits to bet on the future outcomes of legislation proposals. Each legislation proposal is trying to improve one or more of these metrics. That's why we legislate. We're trying to create a better public situation. And we all could take part in a marketplace, as we do with stock markets or even with consumer markets. We can buy into these legislation proposals, and then they would go through a voting. The voting would be also digital voting, like a mini referendum where you have online delegations. That's a relatively well-established concept called liquid democracy or liquid voting. And then those that are going through the voting are implemented. There is no more commissions and so on that review it. It's implemented as is. So we took out the parliamentary concept. Now it's everybody betting on future proposals. We don't have too much capacity to vote on everything. We have to vote on very few things. We could say we're going to vote on the top 10 proposals each month. We have room for the population to absorb and understand and vote on 10 things per month. Then we need to have a mechanism to decide which 10 things we're going to vote on. And that's the price mechanism. So the legislations that have the highest value in the market, where people bet most, that shows that they have the highest potential. Then they are the ones that are voted on, and then if they are voted positively, they become legislation. And the interesting part is we have, in each legislation, we have a period where we track the results. And when the results are positive, the people who bet on them and co-created them get a payout. So, and if they are creating negative results, then you lose your credits. And you might have to wait for a while before you get them back, because we don't want to silence people forever because they, bet on something that harmed the public goods, if you like. But you'll be, your voice, your influence will be reduced for a while, which is, I think, an important feedback loop that we have in, of course, tech companies and so on. That's the front wheel of legislation in the merit democracy. And the part that's, I think, so linked to merit is, if we create the value and which we define, then it's clear that you get rewarded for it. Then sort of this market principle is embedded into creating the social goods. Should I move on to the back wheel? So what the main jobs of the state is to create the framework for the markets and for That's the laws, the legislation. And then the other part is the execution of public goods. We have to spend the money to create those schools and the hospitals and the roads and infrastructure and so on. And the back wheel is about again an iterative cycle of working with the markets to reward them for and to tax them for their positive or negative impacts. So it's achieving of the public goods by creating the incentives for companies to change their business models. An example could be that the state tracks what is the impact of a company like Donkey Republic. Are we improving the things that we define in the handlebar, the congestion-free roads and noise levels in the city and the quality of life and happier people? If so, then a proportionate financial incentive is paid to the company for its impact. That could be every 3 months, like a MOMS. So instead of the company, paying 25% of its revenue in MOMS, there's a different interaction between the state and the company. The state calculates the company's product's impact on the things that we care about collectively, and either pays the company or charges the company for the negative impacts. So if you're a taxi company, you're most likely going to get charged because you're creating a lot of negative impacts. And if you're a bike sharing company, you're most likely going to get payouts because you're creating positive impact. And that creates, it's already something we're familiar with the afgift concept in Denmark, the extra charges on things that are, harming public goods, whether it's on gasoline or it's on tobacco and so on. This is just making it a lot smarter, and these incentives should also update every 3 months or frequently. We shouldn't stagnate. It needs to be a dynamic incentive because our demands is collective changes over time. So if you're a gaming company and you're creating harmful behavior, which I researched for the book is the case, there's been research done, and kids playing certain war games, if you like, are seen to act more aggressively, whereas there are other games that are prescribed by institutions for treating some of the psychological challenges that kids have. So there are clearly design principles that can create positive and negative effects. The same is true very much for social media. I mean, we don't like many things about what happens in social media with both propagation of lies or misunderstandings about the public reality, but also degrading comments and even how, of course, teenagers are viewing themselves. And so all of these outcomes of the social media platforms could be public goods that we define and reward. And then it would be up to the companies to change their algorithms and their systems to provide more of these public goods. And that's the back wheel, the definition of the metrics, the company adjusting its business model and getting the pay-in or payout based on the calculation. And we update the metrics again, and the company adjusts the business model and so on. So there's I think one of the misunderstandings with last 30 years that privatization is bad. The system in UK, I've gotten this pushback. They privatized the rail system and it became so expensive. And is that when the markets fail, we should take the responsibility on the governing bodies that we didn't incentivize and frame them correctly. Because markets can work well. It's our job to reward the good outcomes and penalize the negative outcomes. No market is free. I mean, whatever people talk about free market, that free market has still intellectual property rights, still has tax code that allow the billionaires to go away with not paying any taxes. There's always a lot of rules of the game, but we need to adjust the rules of the game to get the outcomes we want. And I think we have enough proof that markets can work to our benefit if we design them correctly.
Is that the last part we're missing? The saddle.
The saddle is us, where we sit. But I think the frame is the part we're missing with the data, because for all of this to work, the state has to function as the host of the very important data. And in Denmark, we are actually, in my knowledge, furthest and sort of the best in having the data framework on public goods. Yeah, from public health to public transport to education, and it's also linked to all organizations, the CVR numbers, and also the individuals with the CPR numbers. Currently, we use that data only for research purposes. We don't leverage that data in the legislative measurement of impacts of legislation, for example, nor in understanding of the impacts of goods and services in the back wheel that I talked about. I mean, if a yoga studio is doing a great job in bringing calm and reducing anxiety and so on, why shouldn't they get a payout from public to do that at a lower cost? That would be actually to our benefit collectively. So it would affect the whole economy if we have this, but it needs this data backbone. So we need to allow this data to be used much more effectively. Today, even though we have a lot of data in Denmark and in other countries, we want to keep it in silos, and we don't want people to have access to it unless necessary for privacy concerns, which is valid. But we can respect privacy concerns while we also use the data in to much greater extent in shaping the economy. Not only for terror risk reduction, which is what Peter Thiel's company is doing for Americans. Palantir, yeah, and that's my fear, that people are of course fearing the Soviet era, and data is going to be abused by the state to do everything we don't want it to do, and to hunt me down. And it's true that a rogue state will do that. I wouldn't want my data to be used to whatever extent in many of the states today, also where I'm born and raised in Turkey. I would have difficulty. So we first need to have a state that we trust, and the state's organizations where we know how the data is used and processed. So there needs to be that transparency. But we also cannot tell the state, oh, I don't want you to have the data. Without the data, this state will not be able to provide the public goods you want. The state is you and me together. Why don't you want us to have our data? It's a bit like, I don't want to track my body metrics, fine. But if we don't take collective action without collecting these metrics, we are getting lost in this space of what is true and not. So I think we need to empower our data collectively, but we need also trust to the state.
If you can vote about everything as a citizen, and you can sort of change things very fast.
Yeah.
Are you moving towards sort of like the Mark Zuckerberg idea of moving fast, breaking things, moving fast, and so on? And how do you do that as a society?
I mean, this is already stuff that's happening with the traditional system, and I don't think people will act less responsible in a system like this because we are putting them more in charge and on the driver's seat.
And you have more transparency.
And you have more transparency, yeah. I mean, if your argument is correct that we will run ourselves out of budget pretty quickly, then most Danish households should be running themselves out of money. They don't. They know what happens when you run out of money. So, and also you have, politicians like Trump, and if you like with Biden, with his big acts, using a lot of public money without having the revenues for it. So the current system is not necessarily better in making sure that the public budgets are balanced. Also in Europe, we have a lot of examples of that. And I'm not saying let's move everything here, but we can pilot and see how people are acting. There are many unknowns still in this framework. My point is, if we start the conversation that we don't have these individual issues of climate and mental health with social media, and with cars in the cities, and with dirty water and so on. It's a meta crisis of democratic governance. Once we understand that, then we say, okay, let's not try to solve these things separately. These are symptoms of the main issue. Then we would say, what can we do about fixing this democracy? Then we could say, are we only going to dance around the small innovations of should we vote more than once every 4 years, or do we? There are these incremental innovations. Then we could say, let's run something more serious. Let's open up the ideas for how democratic governance could look like. For example, citizen assemblies is an interesting idea. I think it's far from sufficient, but let's experiment. Let's have some metrics about what defines a good democracy. I also defined it in the book as, I say, 4 main metrics that are quality of policies, agility, so how fast you can steer, and transparency and agency. So if we have these metrics, or such metrics that we think define a good democracy, then we can run experiments and figure out what new institutions should look like.
And when you say we can run experiments, how do you envision this to play out? Should it be like a small country like Denmark being a laboratory for this theory, or how would you sort of like kickstart it?
Right. I think any country, or even cities or regions that have certain rights carved out, like sandboxes where they are allowed to experiment, could be the level of scope. It doesn't have to be nation states. It could be at a smaller state level. And then we don't have to run all the aspects at once. We can start with something small. The first thing I would start with, for example, is to require that any legislation is linked to measurable metrics, and those metrics are then measured over time. The legislation's impact is measured over time. When we did that,
meaning that you could change the legislation if it doesn't live up to the purpose.
It would be an obvious outcome of that, because why should you keep that legislation if it didn't live up to that? Another obvious outcome is who backed this legislation, and if it did well, then that would be a positive score on them. If it didn't, then it would be negative. So as a politician, you have to think twice before you vote yes or no. It's not only about how popular the policy is. It's about what will really happen when it's in place. That changes everything, in my opinion. Once I can tell you that most of your current voter base is against it, but you actually have evidence that it should work towards creating more of the goods that they want. So now you need to step into the leadership role and explain to them why you need to do it, rather than just going with the comfortable what is popular.
Which brings us to the situation that we talked about before we turned on the microphones, about politicians maybe having a sort of like a trust pilot.
Yes.
Rating.
Yes, I mean that as soon as we calculate the outcomes of legislations, that would trickle into being able to score a politician's performance. And hopefully next time we would run an election, you wouldn't just look at the picture of a politician, you would have a score next to it. And that would also be, I find it strange that we are so emotionally driven on such important part of our lives, and we look at someone's face and judge how much or how well they will do in policy. So this is we're supposed to not care about someone's looks when we're hiring them, right? We're supposed to really be objective about their capabilities, maybe their character. And the current conduct of politics is almost increasingly about creating an image and bonding and trust. And that creates the environment where we act on the sort of the emotional brain, the fast-moving brain, from Daniel Kahneman's moving, the fast and slow thinking. The fast thinking, we all have this gut reaction to things, but it's often how we get manipulated because it's not the critical thinking part. That's what the, marketing bait companies use when they are pushing us products that are actually not benefiting us. So we need to change the way politics is conducted, where our critical thinking mind is at play more and more. And that means instead of bonding with the picture and voting for that, we need to understand really what they've done in the past. And it's great with the questionnaire where you see how close you are with the person and their voting pattern. But I think we need to be a lot more in that path of scoring their real performance and actually getting them out of that seat and us in the seat. And this becoming a fluent seat. Anyone can step in and out based on how we interact on this democracy platform, digital platform.
Could one say that you're introducing a very rational system to someone who's very irrational? Humans.
Yeah.
Human beings. Citizens.
Yes. That's a very good point, that we need to accept that we are irrational as humans and not see it as a bad thing. That's just human nature. And we have a lot of research, where it comes from, why we are evolved this way. But the good news is, depending on the context, depending on the organization and the process, we can act a lot more rational. So we need to put ourselves in the context where we're acting rationally about public choices. And we were also talking about how we are acting when we are buying and selling shares. That in that context, we don't look at the picture of the CEO. We start, because the context is where you look at the analytics of the company and the industry, and it's a complete different mindset that's going on there. It's about the design, the behavioral design of nudging people. If we want to tap into our weakness as emotional people, then we would do more of what politics is doing today, which is tapping into our emotions and creating bonding and emotional loyalty, but then not fulfilling our needs. So we get in despair. And then we start to vote for extreme parties and sort of bring it all down kind of reaction.
This would require, you've been talking about transparency as well. This would require a lot of transparency to sort of like figure out whether politicians are really living up to their promises and creating this Trustpilot score. Could it also tip into some sort of like a social surveillance?
I think there's more danger as is than that would be in this situation. Because currently we have some kind of technocratic state where we're told stories spinned by spin doctors, and then there is the grown-ups table where the real policy discussions are happening, sort of concealed from public what is possible and doable. But we're not really part of the conversation. And in that grown-up conversation, there is already increasing sort of reliance on actors like the American military or whatever is necessary in the conditions we're in, and we're permitting them to use potentially more of our data without a real public discourse, a real public discussion. So I think we run more of the danger if these conversations are happening through the very few politicians behind closed doors than in a system where the discussion is happening transparently, digitally, online, and we cannot take decisions that are not collectively agreed on and transparent to all of us.
Ja, det var altså Erdem Ovacik, vi her hørte. Han har skrevet bogen The Next Democracy, det næste demokrati, og jeg linker til den fra Tektopias hjemmeside på techtopia.dk. Du har lyttet til Techtopia. Vi udkommer hver mandag. Du kan finde tidligere afsnit på techtopia.dk. Du kan skrive til mig på henrik@techtopia.dk. Og du kan følge os på diverse sociale medieplatforme. Der hedder vi som regel @techtopia.dk. På LinkedIn, der hedder vi bare Techtopia. Så der kan du også finde os. Mit navn er Henrik Føns. Det er mig, der bestemmer i Techtopia, som jeg plejer at sige, og jeg får hjælp af Anders Bredsdorff. På genhør i næste uge.
Techtopia.
Techtopia er en ugenlig podcast om mennesker og deres teknologi, udgivet af Ingeniørforeningen Ida i samarbejde med .dk og Ida Forsikring. Mit navn er Henrik Føns, og det er mig, der bestemmer i
Techtopia.